Hello, everybody. I'm so this is a bit of a tall ask and a very recent one there from Evan. So um, to present just some reflections and insights on a piece of research that we've been doing over the past couple of months at Erasmus University. My name is Siobhan Airey, and I'm an assistant professor at the School of Law in Erasmus University in Rotterdam. And my background is in, I suppose, public international law, and also, I suppose, transnational law and governance. And so I initially started, several years ago, researching the international governance of official development assistance, or aid. For some of you, things like trade and investment is an area of international financial activity that's governed by trade rules and everything, but believe it or not, aid isn't. And yet it's a very sensitive and political area of activity. And so I wanted to understand how it was governed. And from that, I kind of got into the climate finance area. As you probably may be aware, I don't know to what extent, but how we're going to finance climate adaptation, the response to the climate crisis is now kind of, fairly high up on the agenda. And there's some very interesting things happening there, particularly in relation to kind of new ways that public actors, so like state banks and that, are engaging with private actors like asset managers and pension funds and that. So anyway, that's just a little bit of background. So what has this got to do with walking? You're probably again aware that a lot of plans and actions at the public policy level are from the international level and national level and sectoral level down. So this was really an opportunity to try and look at, well, what would it look like from a community level up, and particularly looking at the governance kind of dimensions to it. So what this was basically a piece of research that myself and a colleague of mine, Alberto Quintabella from Italy in the School of Law, got a little bit of funding for from our own university and network that they're involved in, which was really on towards a just transition. We had these following kind of elements to it that we really wanted to explore. One was like a research methodology, not only interdisciplinary, but also engaged. That's a very strong part of the network of universities that Erasmus is involved in, that we managed to get the funding for. We also wanted to look at a kind of an educational dimension to it. And then these were kind of our partners involved in that. UNIC is the network of universities that we got this seed funding for. Lustrum was our local kind of institutional organization, or sorry, not Lustrum, but Erasmus X, which links with local community groups in Rotterdam. And so we linked with them to connect with what became our partner, Iedereen on Board, which in Dutch translates into English as everyone on board, right? So just very quickly, the project that we got the funding for, which was literally this academic year, had the title of Financing a Just Transition for Cities. And kind of 4 dimensions. One was looking about like the governance side, but another was really looking about connections to and relationships with places and things. So if we were to look at this kind of sometimes very vague concept of a just transition, we thought by connecting it to a place and to particular things and items might make it a lot more specific and relatable for people living in a particular area. That enabled us then to link with kind of community development, urban geography people. The morality side, we brought in people from philosophy. And then the idea of moxie was just to kind of, let's be, a bit ambitious with how we work together, how we think about this. So that was kind of the title of our research project, right? Now, I think the thing that Evan was kind of interested in talking a bit more about was really about using walking as a research methodology. How I know there's probably a lot of debate about like what does methods versus methodology mean, but for me, methods is how we do research, but methodology can be how we think about what we do to do our research. So there's a little bit of a theoretical end there. Walking is fairly prominent in some of the social sciences disciplines there, both for 2 ways. One is a way of doing research, but also as a way of interrogating research. And that means, just in my view, that it's very open to kind of critical perspectives on whatever kind of topic, subject matter kind of community you're engaging with. And it's not well known in law and legal studies. As you probably know, if you think of a lawyer or somebody, you know, studying law, very often you can imagine them kind of a bit like a Dickensian thing, sitting with books and all the rest of it. And that certainly is true in the predominant kind of both research methods and methodologies used in law, even though we've seen, obviously for several decades, a very strong critical approach to kind of law and legal research. And we're now seeing kind of like law and ethnography, law and anthropology, law and kind of areas that are bringing in obviously other kinds of particularly qualitative and empirical approaches. But walking is not a part of it. But for this, I really drew on my prior professional knowledge before I came into academia, where I had used participatory action research approaches to engage with communities to understand and to kind of discuss kind of, you know, changes they wanted in their communities. I have a background in international development, so I kind of drew from practical research, you know, there. So here, for those of you that may or may not know, here's Rotterdam in the grand scope of things, kind of in the Netherlands. As you can see, it's a delta area. Rotterdam Port is one of the biggest in Europe. I popped this map up here because, one, it's a map. And when we're talking about a walk or a walking tour, we are working with maps. And I think there's like really wonderful and interesting stuff one can do with maps. This is a tourist one of Rotterdam. And as you can see, it picks things that people can go and see, like any kind of tourist map and all the rest of it there. One of the interesting things that this doesn't show, of course, like maps can show certain things and also they hide certain things, kind of is literally the history of Rotterdam in terms of its urban and built environment. Rotterdam was bombed, carpet bombed actually, during World War II over 3 days. So this part of the city was completely kind of flattened. And that has now given rise to some very interesting architecture more recently, but at the time, immediately after the post-war period, all this area around here for residences, but, you know, these kind of very simple housing units, I suppose, or apartment blocks were kind of built and everything. So there's a very interesting history to the city in terms of the urban built environment and its history, which obviously things like these tourist maps don't necessarily always capture, but it's there. This, just to show you, here's where we did the walk. So oopsie daisy, let me just go back a bit there. This is the island. So this is called Noorder Island. So it's an area that's kind of reclaimed, believe it or not, from the river. Initially, like going back several hundred years, it was just kind of like a spur, I suppose, from, you know, the hinterland. But now it's an island with several thousand people living there, you know, quite densely populated, one green space in the middle. And then here on the right-hand side was the tour or the walk rather, that we developed. And I'll go through that in a little bit more detail shortly. But I just wanted to cover a little bit about how we did this. Something like a walk, in my view, is very kind of process-led, for want to use a clumsy term, I suppose, really, about what was the method that you used. We centered it really on creating a relationship with the community organization Iedereen on Board and an incredibly vibrant woman that kind of leads it called Ellen van Bogatum. And so there was a lot of talking and storytelling. And in, I suppose, the method that we used, after we kind of had worked together, there was a connection and we said, okay, let's try this out. We asked them to say, just pick stories that to them meant or somehow captured the idea of a just transition. Now, they've already been involved in a lot of kind of, I suppose, urban greening work on the island and leading that. And so there was kind of a base kind of to work there, but bringing the justice side and bringing the transition side was new for them and that. So in terms of a process, really, in hindsight, here's how I would kind of describe it. We really kind of focused on the idea of a right relationship. We wanted the relationship between the community group and ourselves to feel right. And that meant, you know, like obviously respect. We wanted to value and sought to value, I suppose, what's affective expertise with so-called, expert knowledge in the scholarly sense. We very much practice kind of a co-decision making. So kind of every step of the project, decisions were made kind of between us both around that. We had this idea of reciprocity in a very, very practical way. Any information we shared or gathered or researched, you know what I mean? We put it into a shared document and we both had access to that document. And they have, they can use that information in whatever way they want afterwards and that, And the idea was that from kind of what local perspectives were and insights and kind of issues, we try then to match scholarly knowledge to that. And a part that I feel was quite important, and I think really they appreciated, was that we recognized that if they were to work with us on this research, they were not going to be able to do other things. They're not a well-resourced NGO. So we sought funding for them from our research grant to support them to do that. The total research grant was, I think, about 10,000. And we sought, I think, about 1.5 to 1,750 to support their time on that. And also that whatever we would generate from this would be of value to them as well, even like after the project would finish. Now, quickly, there were several stories, but if you can just see here, we narrowed it down to kind of literally physical places on the island. The first one was where we actually met a lot. This is kind of like Erasmus University has this building, or rented this, what would have been a building in the area. It's very interesting. There's a lot of regeneration going around here. But anyway, this is where we used to meet. That and coffee shops in various places on the island. But that was an opportunity for us to think about the role of the university and kind of what would right relationship look like in these kind of, say, university community collaborations. Number two was IAB's new kind of home space, right? And from that, one of the topics that came up then was around, how they were engaging with decision makers, both in the Gemeente, which is kind of the local municipality, but also other kind of community kind of governance and decision making kind of mechanisms. There's a neighbourhood council. Obviously, within the area, there's a water board, and you can travel up, let's say, at different governance levels on that. But also we looked at horizontally, like what were the other NGOs and other initiatives that they were involved in, and the kinds of, in particular, resource and recognition kind of challenges that came on. Number three, the kade means a key in Dutch. And this was an opportunity for us to look at flood management, kind of responses. It's a very complex area of governance. The Gemeente, again, the municipality, is kind of the main lead public authority in that area, and we discussed some of their responses, which in practice actually mean them landing a huge bag of sandbags on a particular place on the island, and that's it, or that's what people really notice. And obviously there are huge issues there in terms of people that are more vulnerable. One of the interesting things here, if you can see in number 4, is that from here you can see the cruise ship terminal that's taken off in Rotterdam. And we were very fortunate to benefit from research that's been undertaken by an economist at Erasmus University Rotterdam, who's kind of captured the health impacts of this new, fairly new anyway, and growing industry. And it's also a lovely contrast with the fact that, like, along here, this island used to serve as really the centre for services and support of the boats that would travel along, up and down, both from Rotterdam port, which is farther out the river, and then all the way into like various places in Europe and that. And that industry itself has gone into huge decline from the island. So there was a lovely story told about how you would have boats maybe up to 4 deep, all along here. There was like 20 cafes serving the boat workers, we'll call them. And then several kind of just shipping services kind of in, along there. And now there's like, I think about 2, there's 1 pub and maybe 1 cafe over along here. Anyway, you get the idea. Evan, this might be of interest to yourself in terms of energy. Obviously, the costs of energy going up and everything, but the Netherlands has a strong history of energy co-ops, and this is something that the group really wanted to try and look at in terms of putting solar panels on buildings along here, but having reducing the cost of energy locally. However, there are challenges with that because some of the buildings along here, the apartment blocks, whoops, here we go again, are privately owned. So there's that whole public-private dilemma there. And then number 6, then finally, was a really lovely initiative taken by the Gaminta to green literally an area that was very kind of concreted over. So we had, you know, some positive examples as well. Just in terms of method, and I'll stop fairly soon. This was really how I suppose we approached it, again, from the insights, from the stories. We just tried to discern and take out certain kind of elements. So I call it location layering, you know. In particular, from a law and governance perspective, you know, one of the things we were really looking at, which was about who are the actors, how are they viewed both in law and governance, so public, private, NGO, individuals, what kind of rights, responsibilities, duties do each of them have, what kind of, you know, what room for maneuver are they recognized as having, what kinds of power relations and other relations are there between them. We also looked at resources, not just, you know, money and finance and all the rest of it there, which was a huge challenge for Adrian on board the NGO, but then also, you know, access to knowledge. And I'm calling all these kind of capitals in terms of social capital, obviously financial capital being another thing, particularly in terms of some of the initiatives they wanted to take, but other things then in terms of like, you know, access to space in the urban environment and that. And obviously the governance kind of dimension was something we were also kind of drawing out from that. Just again, very briefly, we, you know, interestingly enough, I suppose, you know, if you start with the idea of a just transition, you think, okay, so what is justice? What is a transition? And how do they come together? And we know we didn't really, that just became a framing piece for conversations, you know, and these were some of the issues that emerged from that. If we're looking at it just, you know, at climate change from a justice lens, what does it mean? What might we see things? How might we like to see things change? And this slide kind of captures some of those reflections, you know, on that. I won't go through it. There's plenty there. Here was the idea of the walking tour that we did with one group of academics, both to talk about the method and then to look at it in that area. And we also used the data from a couple of the say from the walk then to kind of inform the project then as well. So that was an outline of one thing that we did there. And then just very briefly, but there was the educational dimension. I'm the coordinator of a legal research methods and writing kind of course in the Masters in Public Law. And so I'm just, one of my things there is to kind of include, we'll just say non-mainstream approaches to legal research as part of that. My colleague Alberto is the coordinator for Perspectives on Sustainability course within that Masters. It's an elective. He's going to use some data there for that course. But then I just thought just before I finish is just reflect on some of the challenges and dilemmas. So obviously there's huge kind of opportunities I would see, you know, from these kinds of ways of obviously in terms of research, but also in terms of like how we learn about how people perceive the law and governance dimensions to kind of climate change and that. But then from, I suppose, you know, our positions as kind of academics, it brings up, for me, two of them certainly were, arose, you know, the university kind of the standard research ethics frameworks, in my view, don't properly capture some of the ethical kind of, in my view, dimensions to doing this kind of research in terms of like initiating the research, maintaining the relationship as a genuinely collaborative one, etc. And then also from the scholarly discipline, you know, there I think, and I'm talking about from a law and legal kind of perspective now, from a mainstream perspective, there can be some challenges there, but I think that those are all kind of, we'll say, on the glass half full end, perhaps opportunities and that kind of thing as well. I'm just including a few resources I can add to these so that people will have some of the pieces I found helpful in thinking through this piece of work at the moment. And I'll stop there now.